You're listening to When the Lies Began. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are undertaking, a really intense chronological excavation of a man whose life perfectly embodies the chilling reality that pure malevolence can wear the disguise of charm. Theodore Robert Bundy. Our mission is to trace his calculated crimes, focusing specifically on, the staggering duality between his clean-cut public persona and the predatory reality he meticulously hid. We've got a stack of psychological assessments, court transcripts, investigative reports, detailing not just his actions, but the mechanics of his deception.
And this deep dive, it's fundamentally a case study in deceptive survival. It really challenged law enforcement profiling for decades.
Yeah.
Bundy completely redefined the existing profile of a serial killer.
Right.
The sources describe him universally as the all-American boy, handsome, articulate, the educated law student who just didn't fit that stereotype of a disturbed killer.
Not at all.
He weaponized his social skills, his perceived normalcy, and his intellect. Those were his primary tools of operation, really. It allowed him to bypass typical suspicion from victims and authorities alike.
And that sophisticated level of concealment points directly to the core pathology we need to define for you. Psychopathy. How could someone so seemingly functional be so monstrous?
Well, the clinical answer points directly to the highest strata of psychopathy. During the Florida trials, Bundy underwent extensive mental health evaluations. He was actually interviewed by Dr. Hervey Cleckley.
Oh, wow. The father of psychopathy.
Exactly. Cleckley's diagnosis was definitive. Bundy was a primary psychopath. Cleckley defined these individuals as social predators. They glide through life using charm, manipulation, completely devoid of conscience, empathy, or any real feeling for others. They are, in essence, shells mimicking appropriate human behavior, but without the internal emotional response you'd expect.
Okay, so if he was a shell, how did he manage to be so effective? Wouldn't a complete lack of feeling lead to emotional instability or mistakes? Wouldn't that expose him quickly?
That's where the concept of the mask of sanity becomes absolutely vital. This facade, it's characteristic of psychopaths. This ability to be deceptive, to lie with total ease, and maintain complete emotional stability in situations that would, frankly, incapacitate a normal person. Bundy was able to operate successfully because his victims, law enforcement, they just had no reason to suspect him initially. And crucially, his psychopathy was considered successful because he possessed traits of high conscientiousness.
Let's pause on that high conscientiousness.
Yeah.
Because many people associate violent criminals with, disorganization, impulse, chaos. You're saying Bundy was hyper-organized.
Exactly. That's the chilling part. Conscientiousness in a psychological context refers to being reliable, organized, goal-directed, meticulous. Bundy used these traits to meticulously plan his abductions, ensure he left minimal forensic evidence, and crucially understand how to manipulate bureaucratic and legal systems. His success lay in the fact that he approached murder like a complicated high-stakes project requiring discipline and detail orientation. He avoided detection for so long, not just because he was charming, but because he was disciplined and methodical. He leveraged traits we usually associate with high achievement, not criminal violence.
That brings us to the origins of this pathology, then. Let's trace back to his pre-1974 life. How did this calculated chameleon persona even begin to take shape? The sources reveal a turbulent childhood, far removed from the idealized image he later manufactured.
Yeah, the initial environment was volatile, unsettling. Bundy spent his early years believing his mother, Eleanor Louise Cowell, was his older sister, and his maternal grandparents were his parents.
That's a huge deception right from the start.
Huge. And it created this profound internal shame rooted in the secret of his illegitimacy. His grandfather, Sam Cowell, was reportedly a violent, highly unpredictable man. The sources suggest this unstable home life, combined with the lack of a proper father figure, contributed to a sort of deviant moralistic approach.
And Bundy found out the truth himself?
Yes. He eventually sought out official records himself to confirm the painful truth. That detail alone underscores his lifelong obsession with secrets and maintaining complete control over knowledge, over the narrative.
The documentation also points to early, really disturbing signs of his detachment and psychopathy almost immediately. Beyond those rumors of small animal mutilation, there's that incredibly unsettling incident involving his Aunt Julia.
Yes, that specific anecdote, it really captures his early predatory nature. It happened when Bundy was only 3 years old. He was found placing kitchen knives around his Aunt Julia's sleeping body and just watching her until she awoke.
3 years old.
3. It demonstrates this early fascination with quiet control and observation, a secret ritual that thrilled him by establishing power without direct confrontation. It wasn't just curiosity. It was this detached exploration of having ultimate agency over another human being. Chilling.
So the inclination for sadism was clearly there early on, but the true ignition point for his full-blown narcissistic rage seems centered on a crucial external factor, the humiliation of rejection.
This point is absolutely pivotal. You really have to grasp this to understand the pattern of his later victims. His narcissistic vulnerability and profound rage were deeply rooted in the shame and resentment he felt after his first serious girlfriend, Stephanie Brooks, dumped him.
Right, she was from a wealthier background.
Yes, wealthy, sophisticated, and she cited his perceived lack of ambition as the reason for ending the relationship. That criticism struck deep into Bundy's anxieties about his humble social class and the shame of his upbringing. It hit a major nerve.
He didn't just feel hurt, he felt completely humiliated.
Precisely. The sources are very clear that this rejection directly fueled his transition into violence. He internalized this event, viewing subsequent violence as a kind of narcissistic revenge. He consciously decided to use violence to reassert his perceived superiority, culminating in this desire to show womankind who was boss.
So it became a vendetta.
Essentially, yes. When the world, symbolized by Brooks, failed to recognize his grandiosity and superior intellect, in his mind anyway, he decided to force recognition through destructive, definitive control.
This ambition to prove his worth drove the creation of his immaculate public facade. We know he studied psychology at the University of Washington, later law at the University of Utah, but he also actively sought validation in the world of respectability and authority.
Oh, absolutely. He was deeply involved in politics, strategically placing himself in positions of power and knowledge. He worked on significant Republican campaigns, including for Governor Dan Evans. But critically, and this is just unbelievable, he secured a position as an assistant director of the Seattle Crime Prevention Advisory Commission.
Okay, wait. Assistant Director of Crime Prevention.
Yes. And while there, he actually wrote a paper on rape prevention.
We're kidding.
Not kidding. This is the ultimate, almost unbelievable level of conscious facade construction. It's pure cognitive dissonance weaponized.
Working on policy to stop the very crimes he was planning to commit. How did that role even benefit his criminal aspirations?
Well, think about it. That role gave him intimate, high-level knowledge of police procedures, victim reporting mechanisms, and most importantly, the gaps in authority tracking between jurisdictions. He understood exactly what police looked for, what they prioritized, and how different state agencies failed to communicate effectively.
He learned the system from the inside.
Exactly. He also volunteered at a Seattle crisis hotline alongside Ann Rule, who later wrote extensively about him. All of this immersion in respectable, authoritative structures gave him the veneer of trust he absolutely needed to disarm his targets.
And while he mastered this public image, he was secretly cultivating the darkness. The sources mention he spent countless hours during breaks doing research in the library.
Yeah, but that research wasn't strictly academic. It was tactical preparation. He read deeply about serial killers, psychiatric journals, detailed criminal psychology texts. He was intellectually mapping out criminal behavior, convinced he was a chameleon who could disguise himself and exploit situations. He truly believed his intellect would always keep him one step ahead of law enforcement.
He was studying how to commit the perfect crime.
Essentially, yes. Which again underscores that high conscientiousness we discussed. It wasn't impulsive. It was studied.
That brings us to the breaking point. Early 1974. The internal pressure became too much, apparently, and he dropped out of law school. The mask began to fail, maybe? And the campaign of terror exploded across the Pacific Northwest.
The transformation was complete then. It marked the transition from theorist to full-time predator. He focused his attacks on a very specific type. Young, attractive, educated women with long, dark brown hair parted in the middle. A profile strongly suggesting it was selected to symbolize and avenge that rejection he suffered years prior from Stephanie Brooks.
And his methodology relied entirely on exploiting a fundamental social inclination, the desire to help someone who appears to be in distress.
His confidence tricks were disturbingly well-rehearsed, very calculated. He would often feign a crippling injury, using a sling, a cast, crutches, to appear harmless, vulnerable, in need of assistance.
Lowering their guard.
Precisely. He'd approach women in public, busy places like parks or outside campus, asking for help carrying items, heavy books, a briefcase, or claiming he needed assistance loading a non-existent sailboat near his bronze-colored Volkswagen Beetle. The goal was always just to lure them close enough to his car, minimizing the time needed for the physical assault.
The sources mention his car was a critical part of this persona, too.
Yes, The VW Beetle.
Yeah.
He kept it spotless, even vacuumed it regularly, specifically to maintain an appearance of normalcy and trustworthiness. This fastidiousness was part of that high conscientiousness.
Inside the car.
Inside, the car was modified. He often removed the passenger seat handle or rigged the lock to ensure quick incapacitation once a victim was inside. It was a trap disguised as an ordinary car.
The pace of disappearances in 1974 was just terrifying and unprecedented. Linda Ann Healy vanished from her room at the University of Washington in February. Donna Manson disappeared walking to a concert. Then, in July, that terrifying double abduction at Lake Sammamish State Park, Janice Ott and Denise Nasland taken hours apart in broad daylight.
The subsequent panic was immense. The press coined the phrase, the Ted murders, spreading this visceral fear throughout Washington and Oregon. The sources highlight that young people completely abandoned hitchhiking. Many became terrified of talking to strangers. It led to this involuntary community safety reorganization.
He must have relished that chaos.
Oh, this level of societal chaos provided Bundy with a perverse satisfaction, confirming his power in his own mind. He watched the panic unfold on the evening news, and critically, he adjusted his future methods based on the mistakes law enforcement made public during their appeals for information. He learned from their coverage.
And what investigators didn't know then was the sheer depth of his pathology, specifically the postmortem behavior that speaks to his total need for domination.
This is where the sadism and the necrophilic compulsion become starkly evident. Bundy confessed that after strangling at least one victim, he returned to the decomposing body on at least 3 separate occasions.
Returned to the body.
What? He would stay there, driven by profound necrophilic fantasies until the body putrefied. This wasn't just about the act of killing. It was an obsession with retaining control over the victim indefinitely, viewing the corpse as permanent property. It provided the ultimate expression of the control he craved, reinforcing his belief that he had destroyed the will of the woman or the idea of the woman who had originally rejected him.
Utterly chilling. Moving into 1975, Bundy relocated his hunting grounds eastward to Utah and Colorado. But his carefully constructed world finally hit a snag. And not through brilliant detective work, but through an incredibly routine police stop.
Yeah, the sheer banality of his initial arrest is astonishing, really. It was the first true chink in his armor. On August 16, 1975, in Utah, a highway patrol officer pulled over his tan VW Beetle simply for running stop signs and driving erratically late at night.
And Bundy turned on the charm.
Absolutely. He was the epitome of charm, polite, smiling. The mask was fully engaged. But the officer, Patrolman Bob Hayward, was suspicious of his evasiveness and noticed the front passenger seat was missing. He asked to search the car.
And that search revealed the legendary burglary tools.
They were critical physical evidence: a ski mask, a crowbar, rope, handcuffs, and an ice pick. Bundy offered flimsy explanations, claiming they were for skiing or camping, but those tools were the key. They unlocked everything.
Oh, so?
This seemingly minor arrest, technically on the charge of possessing burglary tools, provided the critical link needed to connect him to the attempted kidnapping of Carol Durange just months earlier in November '74.
Ah, the victim who fought back and survived.
Yes. Carol Durange was incredibly brave. She fought him off and managed to escape after he impersonated a police officer and tried to handcuff her in his car. Her detailed description, combined with the burglary tools, especially the handcuffs found in his car, finally provided the necessary evidence for an arrest warrant related to her case. The man who had meticulously avoided capture across multiple states was finally apprehended because he failed to heed a stop sign.
But prison walls couldn't hold his grandiosity, could they? Bundy saw confinement not as punishment, but as, a new stage for his superiority complex. The 2 escapes he pulled off are legendary.
They absolutely are. And they served as potent demonstrations of his belief that he was intellectually above the system. His escapes weren't just lucky breaks. They were meticulous calculations driven by his narcissism and that high conscientiousness again.
Tell us about the first one, in Aspen.
The first one occurred in Aspen, Colorado in June 1977. He was acting as his own attorney, which granted him certain privileges. He was allowed to review documents alone in the second-floor law library at the courthouse, preparing for his trial. He calculated the precise drop, recognized the guards' established patterns of complacency, and simply leaped out the window.
Just jumped from the second floor. He broke his ankle, didn't he? An injury that would stop most people immediately.
It did. He broke his ankle. But his sheer will and adrenaline, driven by this desperate need for control and freedom, kept him moving. He managed to evade capture for 6 days, hiding out in the mountains, breaking into a cabin. He was only caught when he drove a stolen vehicle recklessly and was pulled over again.
You'd think they'd learn their lesson after that.
You would think. But the authorities, perhaps underestimating his meticulous planning capabilities, failed to implement sufficient security for someone like him.
So his second escape, later that year from the Glenwood Springs jail, that was even more incredible, right? A demonstration of his intellectual control over his environment.
It was a shocking display of logistical brilliance and patience. He had deliberately lost 30 pounds, dieting to make himself thin enough to fit through narrow spaces. He somehow managed to procure a hacksaw blade, probably smuggled in.
A hacksaw in jail!
Yes. And he patiently sawed through the metal supports in the ceiling of his cell over a period of weeks, covering his work with accumulated debris. On December 30th, 1977, during the holiday lull, he climbed through the hole he'd made, navigated through the crawl spaces and ventilation shafts, and dropped down into an empty apartment used by a jailer who was away for Christmas.
Unbelievable.
He stole the jailer's civilian clothes, tidied himself up, and simply walked out the front door of the jail looking like he belonged there. He used his intellect and organizational skills to methodically exploit every single systemic weakness he had observed in the jail. It just confirmed, in his own mind, that he was superior to his captors.
That second escape, however, that set off the deadliest final chapter of his spree, didn't it? He fled Colorado and made his way down to Florida.
Yes, he headed south, eventually ending up in Tallahassee, Florida. He sought anonymity under the stolen name Chris Hagen. He was on the run, desperate, probably feeling invincible after the escape.
Did he think he'd be safe there?
He believed the geographic distance would provide absolute anonymity. He was certain that Florida authorities would know nothing about the crimes committed under the moniker Ted, thousands of miles away in the Pacific Northwest or Colorado. Unfortunately, this relocation led directly to the brutal events that secured his permanent infamy.
Right. By January 1978, just weeks after escaping, he launched the brutal, concentrated attacks at the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University in Tallahassee.
This was a frenzy of violence, quite different from some of the earlier, more planned abductions. It indicated, perhaps, a loss of that calculated control he usually maintained out west. In the early morning hours of January 15th, he stormed the house, attacking 4 women in their beds within minutes.
Who were the victims there?
Lisa Levy and Margaret Bowman were bludgeoned and strangled, killed instantly. Kathy Kleiner and Karen Chandler were severely beaten with a heavy piece of oak firewood he'd picked up outside. Miraculously, they survived. Within an hour, he attacked Cheryl Thomas, another student living in a duplex nearby, leaving her critically injured. All 5 were victims of intense personal bludgeoning, marking a horrific escalation in the intimacy and savagery of his violence.
And he was finally caught again about a month later, this time in Pensacola. How did that happen?
On February 15, 1978, a Pensacola patrol officer noticed a suspicious orange VW Beetle, another VW lurking in a residential area late at night.
Yeah.
The officer ran the plates. They came back stolen. He pulled the car over. Was it Bundy driving? Yes. Bundy, driving, offered a false name, Kenneth Missner. But he panicked when the officer pressed him and tried to flee. There was a struggle, and he was finally handcuffed. Fingerprints quickly confirmed his real identity. Theodore Robert Bundy, wanted for homicide and escape in Colorado, and now a prime suspect in the Chi Omega attacks, and at least 36 murders across several states. The cross-country spree was over.
And this final capture led to a conviction based on, as you said, groundbreaking forensic science that the sources highlight as absolutely critical.
That's right. The role of forensic odontology, or bite mark evidence. Bundy's conviction for the murder of Lisa Levy was secured, in large part because of the distinct and vicious bite mark he left on her body during the Chi Omega attack.
A bite mark. How definitive could that be?
The strength of this evidence lay in the fact that Bundy had highly irregular, crooked teeth. They were chipped and poorly aligned. This made the impression a unique signature, like a dental fingerprint, that could be matched precisely to casts made of his teeth.
It's remarkable that this was the linchpin, especially since, as you said, modern audiences are so accustomed to hearing about DNA. This predated widespread DNA evidence.
Correct. The dental evidence was huge. It helped secure the conviction before salivary or other DNA evidence could be widely utilized in courts. Furthermore, this was the first time that bite mark evidence was admitted into the courts of Florida, marking a necessary advancement in forensic science. It was needed to track a killer like Bundy, who had meticulously avoided leaving traditional evidence like fingerprints for nearly a decade.
Yet even facing overwhelming scientific evidence, Bundy continued his performance. The televised trial in Florida, the first nationally televised trial in U.S. history, became an international spectacle and really a stage for his ego.
It was pure theater, driven by his grandiosity. Bundy insisted on representing himself, acting as his own lawyer, particularly in the second Florida trial for the murder of Kimberly Leach. He wasn't really trying to seek justice. He was trying to relive, control, and feed his narcissistic self-image.
He enjoyed the spotlight.
Absolutely. He viewed the trial as a personal battle against the prosecution, a chance to show off his intellect. The media was utterly transfixed, calling him the golden boy, focusing on his looks and charm. The courtroom was packed, often with women drawn to his composure and articulation, despite the horrific allegations against him.
That phenomenon, known as hybristophilia, this sexual attraction to violent criminals, it's deeply troubling, but it really highlights the effectiveness of his charm, doesn't it?
It does. Hybristophilia manifested as women traveling to Florida just to be near him, writing him love letters, some even mimicking his hairstyle and clothing. His composure and intelligence created this bizarre psychological dissonance where the audience struggled to reconcile the attractive, articulate man they saw on TV with the monster described in the testimony. This attention was, in a way, his ultimate validation, reinforcing his delusion that he was somehow special, superior to the moral judgment of society.
And the crowning moment of this bizarre courtroom performance was his marriage during the trial.
To Carol Ann Boone, yes. A truly stunning and highly manipulative maneuver. Boone, a former co-worker from Washington State, had remained steadfastly loyal throughout his incarcerations, publicly convinced of his innocence.
How did they even get married in court?
During the 1980 penalty phase of the Kimberly Leach trial, while Boone was on the witness stand testifying to his character, Bundy asked her to marry him. Under an arcane Florida law at the time, a public declaration of marriage made in front of a judge, who was an officer of the court, constituted a legal marriage. So right there, he married her. Even as the jury ultimately sentenced him to death again, Boone steadfastly refused to accept his guilt, demanding irrefutable physical evidence and blaming everything on the sensationalist press.
Incredible. As we move toward his final reckoning on death row, the conversation shifted from the courtroom drama to this complex psychological battle with criminologists and FBI agents trying to extract confessions, right?
Yes. Bundy turned the truth into a commodity. He used partial confessions, hints, and riddles strategically, primarily to delay his execution date. His discourse in these final interviews, especially with FBI Special Agent Bill Hagmaier and Dr. James Dobson, was a masterful example of denial and psychological manipulation.
He refused to take personal responsibility.
Absolutely. He refused to say, "I killed them." Instead, he shifted the blame using these elaborate metaphors. He spoke of an external malignant condition, an entity or a compulsion consuming him, like a cancer or an addiction.
He framed himself as a victim, too.
Exactly. He referred to his violent urges as an uncontrollable compulsion or an addiction to sexualized violence, often blaming pornography for corrupting him, particularly in the Dobson interview. He claimed he was victimized by his compulsion as much as anyone else had. This was a calculated technique to displace blame away from his rational, law-abiding self and onto some external, abstract, uncontrollable force. By presenting himself as a victim of his own mind, he attempted to maintain the facade of the intelligent, moral man trapped by disease right up until the very end.
But despite this hardened psychopathy, the sources suggest there might have been one small, perhaps profound, chink in the armor near the end, tied to his daughter, Rosa.
That's a complex point, noted by his last attorney, Polly Nelson. Rosa was conceived during a visit on death row, likely facilitated by bribed guards, and born in 1982. Nelson observed what she described as a small transformation in him related to Rosa.
What kind of transformation?
Nelson speculated that Rosa's unconditional, unguarded love elicited in Bundy something akin to a first glimmer of heartfelt love. She theorized that until then, Bundy genuinely thought everyone else was just faking emotion, just like him. Rosa's existence might have opened his mind, even slightly, to the possibility that genuine emotion existed. And in that potential moment of realization, Nelson felt he may have finally begun to grieve, not just for his victims, but for the life he had destroyed. Speculative, but poignant.
We know he confessed, finally, to killing between 28 and 36 women. But based on his criminal patterns, his movements across the country, the actual number is widely believed to be much higher.
Yes, much higher. Some researchers and investigators believe the actual number may be 100 or even more, spanning sporadically from possibly as early as 1969 up to his final capture in 1978. The central issue was what criminologists term the dark figure of crime, the unreported or unconnected cases.
And the police couldn't track him effectively.
Compounding that was the woefully inadequate interjurisdictional cooperation at the time. Law enforcement was simply under-equipped, technologically and procedurally, to track a killer who constantly crossed state lines. Bundy knew exactly how to exploit the petty professional rivalries and communication breakdowns between state agencies. He could essentially reset his hunt every time he crossed a border, ensuring no single authority ever grasped the full scope of his violence until it was far too late.
The end came quickly, though, once the final confessions were secured and the last appeals failed.
Yes, all legal avenues were exhausted. On January 24, 1989, Theodore Robert Bundy was executed in Florida's electric chair, nicknamed Old Sparky. His final words were quiet and brief, spoken to his attorney Jim Coleman and a minister. He said, "Give my love to my family and friends, nothing more."
No grand speech, no final revelation.
No, just that quiet statement before the end.
Outside the prison, the response was anything but quiet, wasn't it?
No. Crowds had gathered outside Florida State Prison. There were reports of cheering, people setting off fireworks, shouting, "Burn Bundy." For many, his execution was viewed as the end of a long, terrifying nightmare that had profoundly reshaped how Americans thought about safety, stranger danger, and the very face of evil.
His case had an enormous, lasting impact that stretched far beyond the end of his life, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The FBI, particularly the Behavioral Science Unit, used the wealth of behavioral data and interviews gathered from Bundy to help structure and refine modern criminal profiling techniques for serial offenders. Furthermore, the catastrophic failures in communication between states regarding his cross-country spree were a direct catalyst for strengthening national databases for violent offenders and missing persons, like VCAP. The goal was to prevent another predator from exploiting those jurisdictional gaps ever again.
So this entire deep dive into the calculated facade of Ted Bundy brings us back to our starting point, the mask of sanity. What is the enduring critical lesson we absolutely must take away about the nature of evil from his case?
Well, I think the core takeaway is that Bundy was such a successful psychopath, precisely because he was intelligent, highly conscientious, and utilized charm not merely as a social tool, but as a primary weapon of antagonism.
Yeah.
He serves as the ultimate terrifying cautionary tale. The monster doesn't have to fit a simple profile.
We look for the wrong signs sometimes.
Exactly. We are often conditioned to look for overt signs of disturbance, chaos, or low intelligence. But pathological deception, the kind Bundy perfected, is often meticulously cloaked in traits we socially prize: charisma, intelligence, articulateness, organizational competence.
It forces us to confront the really uncomfortable fact that we often mistake social grace and outward intelligence for moral integrity.
Absolutely. And while law enforcement continually refines the tools used to recognize and track predatory behavior, perhaps the most terrifying and enduring lesson from Ted Bundy is that monsters don't have to look like monsters. They can look exactly like any one of us. The challenge for all of us, then, is to become better at recognizing the subtle, consistent signs of pathological deception and a fundamental lack of empathy, looking beyond the surface charm, which is, after all, the easiest facade for a psychopath to construct and maintain.